A massive recruiting weekend for LSU. We've got everything you need to know. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt McMahon. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you so much for that. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Is the LSU basketball program salvageable? Got some thoughts on that. Kyren Lacy's attorney provides an update on the former LSU receiver who's first facing really serious charges. But let's begin with a recap of LSU's Junior Day, which took place on Saturday in Baton Rouge. And the guest list, as you would imagine, long and distinguished. Not only were these current juniors, so class of 2026 prospects, but also some select 2027 prospects. Louisiana looks like it's going to be pretty ripe for 2027, and there were some top-tier players on campus. We'll talk about them in just a second. So I have three main bullet points that I want to get to as we recap Junior Day. I'm going to oversimplify this because I understand, by and large, the majority of fans don't get into the nuance of recruiting. It's basically twice a year where you go, who do we get and what do I need to know? So I'm going to try to make this not super deep dive, but it's going to give you a perspective on what this weekend was and why it was important. So first of all, there were three massive uncommitted prospects from the state of Louisiana that were on LSU's campus. Now, if you're an everydayer, and thank you for that, you've heard me mention this, but 2026 in Louisiana is one of those once-in-a-decade kind of bumper crop type years where you get everybody from this class and you're setting yourself for a championship run, like the 2001 class with Marcus Spears and Michael Clayton and Andrew Whitworth and Marquise Hill, the 2011 class they called the Fam that had Jarvis and Odell and Freak Johnson and Lyle Collins. This 2026 class is similar. So Lamar Brown is the number one offensive lineman in the country. He's the number 11 overall player in the country. Blaine Bradford is the number 14 overall player in the country, the number one safety in America. Richard Anderson, the number 2 defensive tackle in the country. Aiden Hall, the number 5 safety in America. Bryson Martinez, number 52 nationally, the 7th best offensive tackle in the country. Jabari Mack from Destrehan, a receiver, number 78 nationally. He had 6 players in Louisiana in the top 78 in the country. It's an incredible season. Remember that this class was supposed to also have Jakeem Stewart in it. So that would have been 7 in the top 78. But in any event, 3 players that I mentioned there are uncommitted. Now, LSU currently has commits from Richard Anderson, the number 2 defensive lineman in the country. He was there from Edna Carr. Aiden Hall, number 38 nationally, number 5 safety, again, the 38th best player in the country, also committed to LSU out of Edna Carr. He was there. And then Kenny Darby, who is one of the top receivers in America. He shut down his recruitment. He's committed to LSU. Ja'Kai Anderson is also committed out of McDonough 35. And then Jalen Chapman, offensive lineman out of Warren Easton, also committed. But 3 players who are uncommitted who are there this weekend: Lamar Brown, the number 1 offensive lineman in the country; Blaine Bradford, the number 1 safety in the country; and Jabari Mack, the number 78 player nationally, the wide receiver, number 14 wide receiver in America for the class of 2025. So these are all very important for different reasons. So Lamar Brown preps at U High. So he's on LSU's campus. And I would highly encourage, if you're interested, his U-High teammate and current LSU signee, Keelan Moses, does a podcast called The Key to It All, and recently had Lamar Brown on the podcast. And they didn't really push about, Lamar picking LSU, but Lamar's a guy who's going to take his time, but has a big decision away. Is probably going to take his time in his recruitment and go see a lot of things. But the more you can get him on campus, the better. And when you start to think about the impact of Lamar Brown, a player like that, remember, LSU is losing 4 starters on the offensive line this year. So as a result, you had to go bring in portal guys. You brought in 2 portal guys that are going to be immediate impact guys, but they're going to be 1-year plug-and-play guys. Then after that, you're sort of resetting. So Lamar Brown, in a similar way that, let's say, Will Campbell or Emory Jones stepped on campus day one and became impact guys, Lamar Brown could be that for the 2026 season. I know it's hard to think a season ahead, but it illustrates what you have to do when you're building a roster. You have to look at what it's going to be, not just for 25, but 26, and what your holes are likely going to be, and have all those contingencies. Blaine Bradford, who we just talked about, is the number 1 safety in America out of Catholic High in Baton Rouge. By the way, I should mention Lamar Brown, the crystal ball, has him 98% to LSU. Blaine Bradford, 96% LSU. Bradford, 6'1", 195. He was injured, so missed a chunk of his junior season at Catholic High this year, but a guy that goes to all the elite camps and just blows up, and really that's where you can differentiate yourself. But remember also, when we look at safety, that's a position where you went and signed Tamarcus Cooley out of the portal this year, and he's got at least 2 years. So Tamarcus Cooley could hang around for a couple of years. But you're returning Jordan Gilbert for his final year of eligibility, and after that, it's all young guys. So you have to build behind those guys with talented guys that are going to help remake the DBU into what we came to expect. And especially when you think about safety, and you go back to LaRon Landry or Craig Stelz or so many different All-Americans, Jamal Adams, Eric Reed, Grant Delpit. I mean, LSU has always had these amazing safeties that they've pumped into the league and been All-Americans, and it's just not the case right now. Bradford fits that mold. That's a guy in Baton Rouge you got to get. So when you talk about Lamar Brown, who's on LSU's campus at U-High, Blaine Bradford, who's 5 minutes away at Catholic High, 2 guys that you got to focus on that were both on campus. Blaine Bradford's dad, Stacy Bradford, raved to On3 about the visit, which is great to see. And then Jabari Mack is the other one who was on campus, the uncommitted prospect on campus among the top ones. So 6 foot, 169-pounder out of Destrehan in New Orleans. He's 91% toward LSU in the crystal ball in the On3. But Mack is one of those guys that is a really small but really explosive wide receiver. And look at the offers: LSU, Mississippi State, but Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. I mean, the biggest programs in the country have come into Destrehan and offered Jabari Mack. Also SEC schools like Auburn, Texas A&M, Tennessee. There's also Florida State, Miami. I mean, everybody. Penn State's got offers from everybody. Michigan, Cal. So that's one that you desperately want to keep in state, because when you look at Kenny Darby, you look at Jabari Mack. Again, Destrehan has been very good to LSU with all of the Jeffersons coming, John Emery coming from Destrehan. It has been Kalaj Cobbins currently on the team from Destrehan. Destrehan has been a great pipeline for LSU, and you need to keep that going with a guy like Jabari Mack. But those 3 prospects, all having those non-committed prospects on campus, is a very big deal for LSU this weekend. I mentioned there were 3 bullet points. 1 is those 3 big uncommitted ones. 2 would be the current commits that you had at 10. Like I mentioned, Richard Anderson and Aiden Hall came up from New Orleans. They're Edna Carr teammates. Richard Anderson's the number 2 defensive lineman in the country. He was the first commit of this class. Then Aiden Hall followed shortly thereafter. So you're talking about a defensive lineman and a defensive back, 2 of the top players in America who are already committed, who remain solidly committed. That helps you recruit behind them. And then after those 2 bullet points, the third I would tell you that I think was most important is the 2027 guys that they had on campus. So yes, it's a junior day, but they did extend some invites to very elite prospects for the class of 2027. And some guys that already have offers. And then they dished out a few new offers for 2027. I know we're going deep into the weeds here because we're talking about guys that are they're in their high school sophomore season. They'll be high school juniors next year. But a couple that are worth noting. So one, and it's two guys that are the number one players in the country at their position. One is Ellis McGaskin. So Ellis McGaskin is a linebacker from Alabama, and he is the number one linebacker in America. He is 6'1", 190 pounds. Remember, a lot of the scouting services don't yet have grades on the 2027 guys. Like as of right now, only On3 and Rivals have grades. So 24/7 and ESPN don't have grades on these guys yet. But On3 ranks McGaskin as the 27th overall player in the country and the best linebacker in the country. He's got offers from Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Florida, of course, LSU, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, South Carolina, everybody wants him. I mean, he's one of those guys that you're projecting as a legit big time impact guy, but to get him on campus, to come over from Alabama for an unofficial visit, right? So on his dime to come over for this shows there is real legitimate interest. And then the other is Ahmad Hudson. And Ahmad Hudson is an in-state player, but he is another number one player in the country. He's the number one tight end in America, and he's from Ruston. He's 6'5". Like he's slender right now, but he's 6'5", 180, but he plays tight end. He is the number 12 player nationally and the number one tight end in the country. Remember, 2027 also has a great quarterback class in Louisiana. So Elijah Haven from Dunham is the number one player in the state for 2027. Ahmad Hudson from Ruston, the tight end, is the number 2 player in the state for 2027 as of right now. I don't need to spell this out too far. McGaskin's huge at linebacker because you can just look at what's going to happen at linebacker over the next year, right? I mean, Harold Perkins is gone after 2020. Harold Perkins and West Weeks are both gone. Whit Weeks could come back for 2026, but he'd be gone for 2027. You were going to have a massive turnover in that room in the next 12 months. So linebacker is going to be a major position of focus. So the fact that you're already in on the best one in the country for 2027, you got him on campus, is big. And then Hudson, remember, that's significant because this was the first time that Ahmad Hudson had the opportunity to sit down with new tight ends coach Alex Atkins, who LSU just hired from Florida State. And all accounts are that went really well. So just a few names to remember. Again, we are 2 cycles from having to really zero in on that. But to have the number one linebacker, number one tight end in the country on campus for your junior day was really significant. And then also in 2027, 3 players were given offers for 2027. Running back Jaden Miles from Catholic High, defensive end Zyron Forstall, and athlete Javon Vital. I hope I'm saying the right, Vital, spelled vital, but could be Vital. Anyway, handing out those offers for 2027 is a big deal, and it's just names to keep in mind. So Jaden Miles is a freakishly athletic 6'2", 200-pounder. If you're watching on YouTube, the thumbnail picture of this YouTube episode is a picture that Jaden Miles took with Frank Wilson. He towers over Frank Wilson. So you can tell that's a guy that is going to be one of the top running backs in the country for 2027, and a name worth mentioning. I mentioned Forstall as well, and Vital. So you're talking about getting an early start here on the 2027 class, but these are some of the names that we're going to have to know. Forstall is an edge rusher from Jesuit in New Orleans, 6'4", 240-pounder. He got his offer. And then Vital is an athlete for 2027 as well. So out of Hamilton Christian. And this is, as I understand it, the first ever player. This is a report from On3's Jarrett Roser. Javon Vital is the first ever player from Hamilton Christian, which opened in 1990, to be offered by LSU. So really significant there as well. So 3 big bullet points. The uncommitted prospects for 2026 that were on campus, the current commits that remain solid, and then the 2027 attendees were notable as well. But a massive weekend for Brian Kelly and his staff with a junior day this weekend. Okay, let me knock out a quick break. We've got an update on Kyren Lacy. I'll get to that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds. You can feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win a $200 bonus bet for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Earlier in December, we learned, actually in January, we learned of a really of a tragic event that happened in December involving a former LSU receiver, Kyren Lacy. If you remember the story, Lacy was home in Thibodaux, and he is accused to have caused an accident, that a fatal accident, an accident that led to the death of a 78-year-old man. All the details are still forthcoming, and like we mentioned then, Kyren Lacy, like everyone else in this country, is innocent until proven guilty, and is entitled to his day in court. He was arrested. He was charged. As we know, we detailed that story here. And like I said then, and I'll reiterate now, there are no winners. This is a man is dead. A family is grieving. A young person with tremendous promise and prospects ahead of him in football and in life, now is facing very serious charges at a formative part of his life where he's trying to prepare for the NFL draft. There are no winners here. But Kyren Lacy's attorney, Matthew Ory is his name, O-R-Y, Matthew Ory, released a statement on Sunday. And this is the first time that we've seen or heard from Matthew Ory with details of the event. As of now, the only details of the crash that we have are what were listed in the police report. And that's a public document, and we shared it with you here on a previous episode, so you're more than welcome to go back and find that and check that out if you're interested. You can Google it and find it. But effectively, and I'm going to oversimplify this, Kyren Lacy is accused of speeding and passing a car in a non-passing zone. And as a result of that action, it caused vehicles to swerve, led to a crash, and a man died in that crash. That's the allegation. Okay. The Kyren Lacy's attorney released a statement on Sunday, and I think it tells a different story. But the real question, of course, is what can you prove in court? Here's, in part, the statement. As the defense attorney for Kyren Lacy, I wish to address the charges of negligent homicide and clarify the facts surrounding this tragic accident. On the day of the accident, Mr. Lacy was driving on a road with 2 lanes in each direction. While he briefly passed other vehicles, he safely re-entered his lane without incident. The collision that resulted in the death of Mr. Herman was not caused by Mr. Lacy's actions. The accident occurred directly in front of him when a second vehicle in the oncoming lane crossed the center line and collided with Mr. Herman's vehicle, in which he was a passenger. He continues, we are of information and belief that the vehicle that collided with Mr. Herman's vehicle was issued a citation. At no time did Mr. Lacy's vehicle strike the rear of Mr. Herman's vehicle, nor did any of the vehicles Mr. Lacy passed collide with his. After the collision occurred in front of Mr. Lacy, he cautiously went around the vehicles after passage was safe. This is an important line. And what's important to note there is the way that the story had been portrayed was that Kyren Lacy passed a vehicle. It caused vehicles in oncoming traffic to swerve. And that's what caused the accident behind Kyren. Like he initiated his passing initiated the while driving in the situation. What this is alleging is that Kyren was behind the accident, so it was happening in front of him. Goes on. It is crucial to emphasize that Mr. Lacy did not cause or contribute to the crash. There was no suspicion of alcohol or drug use involved. Furthermore, contrary to some media reports, Mr. Lacy never returned to the scene of the accident. That's what some had said, that he returned and then drove away. And then he goes on to write about what's coming up in Kyren's life and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that tells a very different story, because what that implies is that, yes, Kyren Lacy did pass a vehicle, returned back into his lane, but the accident happened in front of him, not behind him, as a result of his actions. I would surmise, given the stretch of highway where this tragic accident took place, that there's surveillance video that's probably being studied that will shed a lot more light on this. But I mean, we all hear things, and I have had conversations, and I have asked. There's not much that I would like to say, especially because we're talking about a legal matter where a man died, and we're talking about another young person's life and livelihood. But it does seem like there's probably evidence that corroborates what Kyren Lacy's attorney is saying. And if that's true, and we'll find out in court, that would be certainly significant for Kyren Lacy. There's no other way to say it. I mean, he's a young guy in his early 20s who is facing negligent homicide charges. I mean, the NFL is one thing. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about a young person who's gets behind the wheel, goes for a drive, and then is accused of committing a crime where a man died. And it does not in any way ease the burden or the pain of the family of the Mr. Herman who died in this accident. But there's also no reason why we should just assume Kyren Lacy is at fault or guilty. That's why there's a presumption of innocence, and the burden of proof falls on the accuser. And we'll see what may come of this. But Kyren Lacy's attorney there telling a very, very different story of events and how this all might have transpired. So as that develops, as we learn court dates or how this all may come about, we'll certainly let you know. For whatever it is worth, I mean, Pro Football Focus rates Kyren Lacy number 163 overall in the upcoming draft. That would have him as a day 3 pick, but certainly a guy that could go to the combine, that could perform well, and maybe elevate that draft stock. But this is certainly a much more serious matter that has to be resolved first before we even talk about draft and everything that happens there. But that's the latest with Kyren Lacy, and as we learn more, we'll certainly share it with you. We'll wrap up Locked on LSU with a little basketball talk next. Stay here. I think LSU basketball hit rock bottom on Saturday night with the loss to Texas. That was just a really lively show now, right? From the details of the Kyren Lacy incident to now LSU basketball, but that's life or death. This is just basketball. If you weren't watching, good for you. LSU lost on Saturday to Texas 89-58. LSU was within 6 at half. It was 31-25, and they just got absolutely bludgeoned in the second half. Texas outscored LSU 58-33. The 31-point loss is the largest loss to an unranked opponent that LSU basketball has had since 1966. I mean, we're talking 60 years. That is the largest margin of defeat by LSU to an unranked team since the year before Pete Maravich showed up on campus. Incidentally, that was also to Texas. I can talk about the game. I don't really think it matters. It's all the same stuff. Couldn't rebound, couldn't shoot, couldn't protect the ball. LSU was just 13% from 3, They're now 320th nationally in a 3-point percentage. They were 2 of 15, can't shoot. LSU got out rebounded 35-23, can't shoot, can't rebound. Texas assisted on 20 buckets. LSU just 5 assists in the ball game. And then turnovers, LSU turned it over 15 times. Texas just 7. So when you look at it, there was nothing good. There was nothing good in this ball game for LSU. So the season's over. They'll play out the string, and they've got a road game against Georgia. They'll play Ole Miss. Then they're at Arkansas, at Oklahoma. They play South Carolina at the Maravich Center, and then they're not going to win any of their last 5. Their last 5 are against number 5 Florida, number 8 Tennessee, number 14 Mississippi State, number 12 Kentucky, and number 13 Texas A&M. So you're not winning any of your last 5. As we talked about, this stretch for LSU, these 6 games, were winnable. I'll remind you, LSU was only a 1.5-point underdog at home against Texas. This was supposed to be a pretty evenly matched game. Texas came into this game 3-4 in conference play. This was not a good Texas team. This is 3-5. They were 3-5 in conference play. This is a very average Texas team that came in and absolutely outclassed you. So there's 2 parts of this conversation. It's the season, but then it's also the bigger picture part of LSU basketball. And people are starting to ask questions about Matt McMahon's job security. And here's what I'll say. Number one, I keep getting asked, can you bring Will Wade back? The answer to that is no. Let's just stamp that out right now. Will Wade's not coming back. I don't think Will Wade will be at McNeese another season because they are playing exceptionally well. And there will be Power 5 jobs open that will try to hire Will Wade. I mean, the only reason for which he is not still the coach at LSU is because he was facilitating payment to players, which is completely legal now. So, and that's something everybody was doing, but he just happened to be on a wiretap. It cost him his job. But he's a great coach. He's a great leader. He's fiery. He wins. Will Wade's going to get a job. Why would he come back to LSU? He is going to have offers, plural, after this season. He's going to go somewhere after this year to a Power 5. You're not getting Will Wade back. The real question is, do you retain Matt McMahon? And I'll remind you, when you hired Matt McMahon, you signed him to a 7-year contract where an 8th year would have been added with certain sanctions as a result of the Will Wade thing whenever that came to pass. You're paying Matt McMahon an average of $2.9 million a year. Either way, if LSU wants to be good in basketball, it's going to cost you money. One of 2 ways. Either you're going to have to invest more in your roster, or you're going to have to pay to buy out Matt McMahon, pay an elite level coach to come in, and then pay to improve the roster. And I don't think there's enough interest and desire for LSU basketball to be awesome for that to happen. The second scenario. So I think more likely what you need to have happen is you need to decide collectively as a program if you want to be good in basketball. Kim Mulkey came in, pounded the pavement, raised funds, and as a result put together a roster capable of winning a national championship and did in 2 years. I'm not saying it's that easy in men's basketball, of course, because there's far more parity in men's basketball than there is in women's basketball. Women's basketball is a top-heavy sport where you have a handful of teams that only that handful ever have a chance. And LSU has elevated themselves into that upper tier. But there's a set of circumstances that work against LSU this year. The SEC is the greatest league this year. It's the greatest single season for any conference in the history of college basketball. That's a mouthful, I get it. But, I mean, this week the SEC had 10 teams ranked. I mean, look at the top 10, and it looks like, it's ridiculous. It almost looks like SEC baseball. Auburn's number 1, Bama's number 4, Florida's number 5, Tennessee's number 8, Kentucky's 12, A&M's 13, Mississippi State's 14. You're just littered with SEC schools in this top 25, even in the top 10. So it's not a good year to be at the bottom of the league, to be a team fighting to be on the bubble, because there's just so much depth and talent in the league. But the question is, do you think Matt McMahon is a good coach? And if you think the answer is yes, then you have to get him talent that he can elevate to compete in this conference. Because when you hear some of the scuttle where programs like Auburn and Alabama and Kentucky and Arkansas are spending $8 to $10 million on their basketball roster, and LSU spending just north of $2 million on its basketball roster, you can't compete. So either way, this is going to if you want to be good, it's going to cost you money on your roster, no matter what, because you're going to have to increase your spending on your roster. Or do you believe Matt McMahon is the guy? And if the answer to that is no, I guess to say, if you give Matt McMahon better ingredients, would he be a better chef? If the answer is no, then you have to buy him out and spend an exorbitant amount of money to hire a new coach and still pay your players. I don't know that there is an appetite for that in Baton Rouge right now, which means you better figure it out with Matt McMahon. But one thing's for certain, it's not going to be this year. All right, that'll do it for us here in today's episode of Locked On LSU. Do us a favor, if you're listening on YouTube, or if you're listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.